Text formatter program. Text to HTML. Many of us no longer use plain text documents as there are now many more advanced word processing software options. In plain text documents, you cannot modify the format of your text. For example, the sentence, "The title of the book is To Kill a Mockingbird," would actually appear like this, so the same sentence without the italics. This is because plain text documents are not sophisticated enough to handle this type of text change. Have you noticed that your IDE is a plain text document? And I'm sure you have noticed that. So when web developers want to convert plain text documents to HTML so that format changes like italics can be seen, they need to make changes to the text to insert tags so that the program will understand it is time to replace certain characters. In this program, you will create a class and several methods to replace underscores in a string with tags that indicate the text should be in italics. Makes sense? So they give us some pretty neat examples here to better understand what they mean. So as you can see here, the word vary for this first example has an underscore before it and after it. And so that means we convert it such that it has this symbol, the caret symbol surrounded with an I, and then caret symbol surrounded with Y, but also with that / as the output. And they also show an example of doing this multiple times within one sentence, so such as the word "this" and the phrase "very good" are italicized. And then they also show examples of where the underscore would not matter. So in this case, there's a single underscore. So this does not, change anything. It's assumed to just be part of the sentence and that no italicizing was meant to happen. And if we get two consecutive underscores, it's also assumed that this is just something that's meant to be left alone. All right, so some parts of the program. So the first part that they suggest here is to create a method called private static int find string. So it accepts a string and it accepts an integer called start. And it says here that it finds the first single instance of string in line, starting at the position start. So by line, I'm assuming, what's meant here is just line is whatever is fed into as the line that we want to process, to convert, from underscores to italic symbols. And so we start at the position start. The parameter string is the string of length 1 to find, and this is guaranteed to be length 1. And the parameter start is the position to start searching, and it is guaranteed to be in the string line. So again, line is definitely some sort of field here, that I would imagine. And at return, so the index of the first single instance of string if the string is found, or -1 if it is not found. And so for step 2, they suggest we create a method called private int count strings, and it accepts this string argument. So count the number of times single instances of string appear in the line. So at param string, the string to find, guaranteed to be length 1. Return the number of times the string appears in the line. And here we get on to arguably the most important method. So public string convert italics. Replace all single instances of underscore in the line given with italic tags. There must be an even number of underscores in the line to be replaced by the symbols that we discussed earlier alternating. So right away here, something that becomes immediately obvious is that the purpose of this method, the count strings, is to check how many underscores there are. So we know right away that if we run this method and we ask, okay, in the line given, how many underscores are there? We know right away that if this is an odd number, then that means we're just going to keep the line as it is. We're not even going to further process it because that's what we're told to do according to this specification. It says right here, the line with a single instances of underscores replaced with I tags, or the original line if there are not an even number of underscores. So that's how we would be using this count strings method. As for this find string method, this would be useful for trying to figure out where the underscores are and, therefore also trying to figure out where to place the new symbols that we're replacing the underscores with. So, if we determine that there are an even number of underscores, we would say, okay, great. We might have some sort of a loop per se. And so for the first iteration, we say, okay, find the first underscore and start at the beginning of the string. So, at position 0. And so we find the first underscore, and then we might do some checks. So the first thing, obviously, that we might want to go ahead and check is the next character an underscore? If it is, then what we would have to do, of course, is that would mean we would run this method again. But this time we would say, okay, so now search within the string starting from not the following character, which we determined was an underscore, but the one that follows that. So 2 characters ahead from, where that first underscore we found was, because we don't want to change that because that just means it's 2 consecutive underscores. However, if it wasn't 2 consecutive underscores and we checked the next character and it was not a underscore, then what we would need to do is we would have to essentially take everything to the left of that first underscore, have that string, then concatenate it, add it to a string with the symbols representing the start of the I, the italic symbol, and then, add that, after that, add the stuff in between the 2 underscores, and then, after we do that, we can continue, searching for the rest of the underscores. So that gives you an idea of the type of program that we would have, within our main method. Or rather, within the actual convert italics method is what I meant to say. And then, of course, we're going to need a main method. So specifically, they tell us here, within the main method, create a string array that stores at a minimum 5 phrases. Be sure some of the phrases include underscores. Initialize the line field to a randomly chosen element in the array. Print out the phrase with underscores converted to HTML elements. Okay. Alrighty, so that sounds pretty straightforward. I think, it's time to just start writing out these methods and, well, the methods and the class itself. So yeah, let's move on to that. Okay, so now we can move over to the JGrasp window, and I already have a new file open, so we can just go ahead and start coding. So I'm going to start with public class, and we'll call this text formatter. We need our curly braces, and we'll just add in the declaration for the main method. So public static void main string array args, and we'll add a new line, And then we will go ahead and start with the find string method like we said we would earlier. So private static int find string, it accepts a string called string and an int called start. And we have our curly braces. So now we can go ahead and start writing our actual code. So we're going to want to iterate over the line, and remember we're assuming, although we haven't declared it yet, we're assuming that we're going to have a field called line, and that line will just be the string that represents, what it is we're trying to convert. So I want to, basically, you want to iterate over this line using the char at method and figure out, figure out, if the char at blah is equal to the string. So essentially what we want to say is for int I equals start, as long as I is less than line dot length I plus. And what we want to do is we want to say if line dot char at I is equal to, actually in this case it makes the most sense to call the equals method. So if it's equal to string, or actually, to avoid any issues with typing, since char at should return a char instead of a string, and the argument we're passed in is a string, we can instead actually go ahead and say if line.char at I is equal to string.char at 0, and remember we can say 0 because we know for a fact that string is always guaranteed to be length 1. So if, these two are equal, then we want to return I. Otherwise, we continue searching. And if we finish searching and we get, all the way to the end of the string, and we haven't found this, string that we're looking for, then we just return -1. So, -1. And that's pretty straightforward. So, yeah, we have our find string method written out, and under, the assumptions that we've made and what we're told about within this comment, it seems that we have what they specified. So we can go ahead and move on to writing the next method. So I change the slide and I'll start writing it. So private int count strings, and it just accepts a string called string. And we need our curly braces. So just count the number of times single instances of string appear in the line. And it very clearly states here that param string is the string to find, and it is guaranteed to be length 1. So since it is guaranteed to be length 1, we can actually go ahead and do something very similar to what we did for the previous method we just wrote. In fact, it's going to be so similar that we can actually just go ahead and copy this. So copy, paste. And now what I want to do is we still want to check if line.char I equals string.char 0, but instead of returning here, what we want to do is we want to have a separate count variable. So int count equals 0, and then if we encounter 1 that is equal to the string we're interested in, then we do a count plus plus, and then at the very end we return the total counts. So very simple, very easy to write. And now that we have that, we can, oh, whoops, I almost forgot. There is one thing that you do need to watch out for, and I almost just fell for it. Don't forget to remove start, because start is no longer an argument to this method count strings. So you just want to start from the beginning of the string, because you want to know how many instances there are of this string in the entire line, not from a specific starting point. But other than that, we should be fine with that method now. So now we can move on to the next method, which is convert italics. So apparently, convert italics is supposed to receive 2 arguments. Well, it's a little weird here because they don't specify the arguments, but the way they describe it in the problem, it seems like they want us to write a generalizable form of convert italics where we accept, where we essentially accept something called original, which in this case would be the underscore symbol, and something called replacement. And that would be what we end up replacing with. So it would be like, this bracket, I bracket, for example. Whoops, I almost typed in something on the slide there by accident. Anyways, so yeah, so for convert italics, we can just go ahead and start writing this out. And, we'll talk about how we want to write this. So public string convert italics. And we definitely want to, accept 2 arguments. So they will both most certainly be strings. So original is one of the strings, and the other string is replacement. Okay, so now we can go ahead and start filling in our code. So how are we going to go about this? Well, as we talked about a little bit earlier, we first want to check, are there an even number of underscores? Because automatically, if there are not an even number, at least according to the specification for this convert italics method, we should just return the original line. So let's just write the code for that first. So if, And then remember, we wrote a method to count the number of strings. So if count strings, and the argument that it receives is the string we're interested in counting, which in this case would be original. So if count strings original, and then count strings original will return the number of instances. We want to know if this number is not even. So to check if it is even, we would say percent, or percent or modulus 2 equals 0. But since we're interested in whether or not it is, or rather, since we're interested in the times when it is not even, we would say not equal to 0, like that. Now we can go ahead and fill in what goes inside this if statement. So if we count the number of times that the original string, the one we're interested in replacing, shows up and it is not an even number, then we simply go ahead and just return line. And remember, line is this field that we haven't created yet, but we will create. And that should be it for that. But now we have to go ahead and handle the case of where it is an even number. So remember, there are a few important things to keep in mind about this case. So if it is 2 consecutive underscores, what that means is that we do not do any replacement. But in any other case, we replace. And so this definitely seems like the type of job for some sort of for loop. So let's just write out a basic for loop and, edit it as we need, as we start realizing, the finer details of what we're going to need to do for this program. So we'll just start off with the basic construct. So for int I equals 0, as long as I is less than, and we'll go with line. So line dot length I plus plus. So right now we just have a loop that's going to iterate over the entire length of, our line. And so what we want to do here is we want to essentially, say, okay, let's go back to our other method. So what did we call it? Find string. So we want to say, within this loop, find, the first instance of original, just using the current value of I. So let's just write that out and, and just store the index. So we'll just call that first, underscore, we'll give it a certain name. So maybe like int begin. Seems logical. So int begin equals find string original and start at I. So for the very first iteration of this loop, we're going to be passing I in as 0 to find string. And what we're essentially asking is find the very first instance of the underscore. Then what we need to do is we need to say, okay, we found where that first underscore is, but we also need to check what is the next character. If the next character is another underscore, then we can ignore these 2 underscores. And we can essentially tell the loop to skip over. So the way to go about this is we could say if line dot char at begin plus 1. Remember, we want to check the one right after begin is equal to original dot char at 0. So if these two are equal, then what does that mean? That means that we should essentially tell the for loop to skip over a bit, because now what we should be doing is saying, okay, well, let's increase I past the points of this begin plus 1. So essentially what we want to say is we want to set I equal to begin plus 1. And the reason this is important is because we're saying, okay, we had 2 consecutive underscores, and now we want to move the loop past these 2 consecutive underscores. And the second underscore is going to be at begin plus 1, so you might be wondering, wait a minute, why are we setting I equal to begin plus 1? Shouldn't it be something like I equals begin plus 2? Well, the problem with this is that after I equals begin plus 1, we're actually going to increment I again, because it's going to reach the end of the for loop, so it's going to have to increment I again, and then I will already be at the char after the 2 underscores with nothing in between them. So that's why we do that. And then else, so in every other case, we would do something different, because this means that there was actually something in between the 2 underscores. So for this other type of case, what you would essentially want to be doing is you'd want to be creating a new string, that you're keeping track of, because there is the potential for returning a new string with these, new symbols and characters. So what we want to put in is we want to have a string declared outside the for loop. So we'll call this string results equals an empty string. And then what we want to go ahead and do is you need to realize that regardless of, whether we have these 2 consecutive underscores, we want to add everything before begin. So essentially what you want to say is results plus equals, right? Plus equals line dot substring, and this is a string method where if we specify the index to start at and the index to end at, it gives us that string from that index to that start index to that end index. So we want to start at I, and we want to end at where we found that first underscore, because for substring, remember, the end index, it does the substring return doesn't actually contain this end index. It's like the 0 up to n-1 type of thing, where we're going to return everything but the underscore. So we want to do that. And then we'll still definitely keep this code, and when we keep the underscores, what we also want to make sure we do is we want to make sure that we keep them in the results as well. So result plus equals, and in this case, since we know they're consecutive underscores, instead of calling the substring method, we could actually just manually type this. So as such, double underscore, and that'll save us a little bit of writing. And now we can actually move on to the else case. So in the case where we found an underscore, but then we realize that there's actually something that isn't an underscore after it, we need to make sure to replace the underscores with the appropriate string, and we also need to make sure that we add in the information between the two underscores. So to do this, we first need to add to results the replacement string. So we called that replacement, so result plus equals replacement. Pretty straightforward. So we have that first underscore set. And then the next thing we want to do is we want to add to results all the content between the two underscores. So we actually have to find the next underscore. So to do that, what we would say is int end equals find string, and then we would want to find original starting from not begin, because we don't want to include the underscore. We would want to start searching from begin plus 1. And that would give us our ending index. And so now we can just go ahead and say result plus equals line dot substring from, and this would be going from begin plus 1, because remember, we don't want to include the underscore, to end. And like I said earlier, the substring method will not include that ending underscore. And the very last thing that we need to do is we need to add the replacement at the end of this entire, phrasing. So we need to add results plus equals. Now, something important here is that it's not specified for replacements if the ending tag, if we can call it that, is supposed to have this forward slash. So I'm just going to make the assumption that we always want to have this, so I will just write the code such that it does this for the ending one. So what I mean by that is I will be sure to say the following. I will say result plus equals replacements dot substring from 0 to 1 plus, and then we want to make sure to include this forward slash plus whatever else is left. So it would essentially be replacement dot substring 1 until the length of the replacement string. And then this would give us a pattern similar to the type of pattern we're seeing here. So now this else statement would handle appropriately, adding the new symbols in and adding the information between the symbols. And the only thing left, after doing all this is to make sure that we skip I over to the appropriate place where it needs to be. And yeah, and that's that's pretty much it. So let's just do that. So what we need to consider is that I will be equal to begin, or rather, well, let's think about how we can calculate this. So begin is the spot of the first underscore, end is the spot of the last underscore. So it makes the most sense actually to say I equals end. And the reason for this is because if we set I equal to the spot of the last underscore, the closing underscore, if we can call that, then the for loop will naturally increment itself and set I equal to n plus 1, which is the spot directly after that underscore that we just finished replacing in our results string. So yeah, that handles that. And this for loop is looking pretty complete. So after the for loop finishes, what we want to make sure to do is to return the original string. And another thing we want to make sure, before we officially call this for loop closes, we want to make sure that we're adding everything to result that needs to be added. So if we go over this again, we're adding everything from I to this, new underscore that we found, not including the new underscore, of course. Then we're doing a little check where, okay, are the two underscores consecutive? If they are, then just add those to result. Otherwise, add the replacement string to result, representing that first underscore. Find the last underscore. Add the information between the two underscores. Add the ending replacement string that is slightly modified. And then continue searching. Just like we did here, where I equals begin plus 1, continue searching. And so that seems pretty good to me. So like I said, after the for loop, now we can focus on what happens after. After the for loop, we need to make sure to return the result. And that should be everything that our convert italics method needs to work properly. So now we can move on to our main method. So the first thing that it says here is within the main method, create a string array that stores at a minimum 5 phrases. Be sure some of the phrases include underscores. Okay, so what I will do is I will first initialize. Right, so I first need to initialize the line field to randomly choose an element in the array. But before, of course, I can do that, I need to make a spot for this line field. So we can just, go up here and just declare this line field as a public field, if we so choose, and so we just call it public line semicolon, and then we'll initialize it within the main method. But before we do that in the main method, we need to create our array of the 5 minimum phrases. So let's do that. So string array, and we can call this phrases equals, and then we can use the curly notation to just type in the phrases that we want. So they said to use a minimum of 5 phrases, and they gave us 4 example phrases, so we might as well borrow these. So this is very good is one of them. Next one is this. This is very good. Next one is this is very good. And the last one is this is very good. All right. So now we can go ahead and generate the random number that we need to index, this array randomly and initialize the line field. So, and this is actually 4 phrases, so we need one more phrase. So we might as well try out a phrase. Oh, whoops. Added a comma in a place where I shouldn't have. We might as well add on a phrase that is actually very similar to the last one we wrote. So this is underscore underscore very good. But actually, let's have the word good italicized. And the reason for this is just to make sure that even after we handle some case where we have double italics in a row, we can still properly handle, italics that are not double in a row and have information between them. All right. So now let's generate a random number. So let's see, we want an int. We'll call it rand equals int. And then remember math.random returns an integer, a double between 0.0 and 0.9 repeating. So what this means is to get a value, between 0 and the length of the array, we can actually just go ahead and multiply this by phrases dot length, because phrases.length is 5. 5 times 0 is 0. 5 times 0.9 repeating is, of course, going to be, a number that's very, very, very close to 5. But when we cast as an int, that is automatically going to truncate or drop the decimal place and just become 4. So we're going to get a number from 0 to 4. And I put some extra parentheses here just to make it very clear that I want the multiplication to happen first, and then I want to cast as an integer. Okay, so now the next thing that we can do is we can go ahead and initialize the line field. So that seems pretty straightforward to me. So line equals, and of course, we'll say line equals phrases rand. And then we want to print out the phrase with the underscores converted to HTML elements. So that sounds great. So to do that, we can go ahead and first, I guess, just, store this converted. So converted equals convert italics. Pretty sure that's what we called it. Yes, convert italics. And we want to pass in the original. So in this case, it's just going to be an underscore. And the replacement is going to be this. And then we just want to print out. So system.out.println converted. And that should be just about everything we need. So I'm going to save. I'm going to accept the defaults. I am going to try to compile with Control B. Okay, so we encountered 2 errors here. Ah, yes, I see. So I made a silly mistake here with my field. I completely forgot to specify what type I want line to be. So I want line to be a string. So let's save that and then ignore the second error for now and just compile. Okay, so now we have a new error. And I see what this error is complaining about. It's saying there's a missing semicolon somewhere. And it's specifically pointing to this line, so where it says string result equals quotes, and yep, it's definitely missing a semicolon. So that was a good catch by the compiler. So Control S to save, Control B to compile. And we have some more errors popping up. So what we have now is it's saying error non-static variable line, so it's complaining about our field line, cannot be referenced from a static context. So what this is referring to is this highlighted line. And in particular, we defined find string as a private static method. So what this means is to be able to access this field line from within a static method, line also itself must be a static variable. So just for the sake of fixing this error, we can just declare line as static. And it also makes sense to do this because line is ultimately it's a variable of this class that we want the whole class to have access to. So it makes sense. So we can save this, Control B to compile again, and we have another error that popped up. So this new error so the new error that we have encountered is that a non-static method, convert italics, cannot be referenced from a static method. So it's saying here that main is a static method, which it's supposed to be, as it always is. And we're trying to call convert italics inside it. But convert italics, if we take a look, is not a static method. So it's essentially complaining about that. And this is very simple and straightforward to fix. So again, we can just add in the static keyword, and this should fix the error. So Control S, Control B to save. And then again, if we take a look, we have another, case of this static error issue. So this time with the count strings method. So again, we can go up to count strings and declare this as a static method. Control S to save, Control B to compile. And at last, we have no more compile time errors, so that's a good sign. But remember, that doesn't mean our program is perfect. We still need to test it out, and we might run into some exceptions. It's unclear, but we'll see what happens. So Control R to run. And we did indeed run into an exception. So the exception that we ran into is the following one. So it says here, string index out of bounds exception, string index out of range, -11, and I have to agree, -11 sounds like it would be out of range. So in particular, it seems like the substring method is not happy, and it's referencing our use of substring. Right, it's referencing our use of substring within this convert italics method. I see. So it's claiming that begin might actually, right, because it's saying it didn't like what was passed to substring as an argument. And we know very well that it's entirely unlikely that I would be a negative number. This is far near impossible unless when we're setting I, we're setting some negative number, which this is possible because you have to consider that at some points we're setting I equal to begin, and at some points we're also setting I equal to end. And something that we neglected to consider was that begin and end can actually return a negative number. If you recall, when we go back to the method find string, we can see very clearly that we can return -1 if we do not find the string that we're looking for. So what this means is that we need to check for this because we've been assuming that begin will be, a positive number, but that is not necessarily the case. And so what we need to do is that, when we're in this else loop, it is pretty clear that if we don't find an underscore, then what that means is that we can just essentially add what remains to result and just, stop the for loop. So we could just write an if statement to do this. So we would say the following: if begin equals -1, then what we can do is we can say result plus equals line dot substring, and so for substring, begin told us, hey, we can't find another underscore. So what we would say is, okay, just give me the rest of the string then. So line dot substring I replacement dot length, or my mistake, not replacement dot length, line dot length. Right? So we're saying, give me the rest of the string. And along with saying give me the rest of the string, we're also going to say break out of this for loop. We no longer want to run the for loop because we already have everything we need for result. There's no need to continue iterating. So hopefully that will resolve that error that we are encountering, but we will certainly see. So it still compiles. And okay, so we ran it, and the example we got definitely came out, it appears, as it should have. Although, to be quite honest, it's impossible to tell if it came out the way it should have, since we can't see the original line. So it probably makes a whole lot of sense if we maybe print out the original line before we print out the converted line, because otherwise it's, we can't really tell what's going on. So Control S, Control B, Control R. Okay, so this helps a lot because now we know exactly what's happening. So it seems like our program definitely behaves correctly in that case. And let's see if we can run it a few times to get something a little, a little different. Unfortunately, it seems like our random variable keeps returning, the same variable over and over again, the same phrase. Ah, here we go. We finally got a different phrase. So what do we see here? Ah, this is very good. This is testing out the one where we have a double underscore and then we have a regular set of underscores. And as we can see here, it worked perfectly. It returned a double set as it should have without, incorporating new symbols. But for the regular set, it replaced them as it should have. And let's keep running this a few more times just to see if we can get a different example. And this is great. So we finally got a different example. And for this one, we can see that it definitely worked as it should have. So this is really great stuff. We know it's working exactly like it should work. And, you can keep trying to run the program to get through all the phrases that we put into our phrases array, but I'm fairly convinced from what I've seen that our program is working correctly.